sharing here. Our next speaker, this is Valerie Otero, who is Associate Professor of Science Education at the University of Colorado Boulder. She got her PhD in Physics Education from University of California, San Diego. Her background, both bachelor's and master's, is in physics and geophysics. Runs a very interesting learning assistance program at the University of Colorado, but I think your talk now is going to be about designing classrooms, it sounds like.
About learning assistance.
Oh, very good. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to talk a little bit about what's going on at University of Colorado Boulder. And so far, I think it's been pretty clear that we have, that a lot of traditional models of instruction are not effective, and we need to think of ways to transform the environments in which we work. I work in a large research university, and that's the environment I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk today about not much, because Neil and everybody else has talked about the crisis in science education. I'll say two or things about what the research shows from a slightly different perspective, and then I'll demonstrate the Colorado Learning Assistant Program and talk about evidence for efficacy and sustainability. So as far as the crisis in science education goes, in summary, there's been little change in assessment results, such as the National Assessment for Educational Progress. There's a critical shortage, and this is one thing that people haven't talked about so far in this conference, of mathematics and science high school teachers in certain areas, especially physics and chemistry and math. There's a lack of conscious involvement of mathematics and science faculty members in both teacher preparation and in the scholarship of teaching within their own disciplines at the university. And by conscious, I mean that our high school, middle, and elementary school teachers are learning how to teach, for better or for worse, from the person that's teaching their science course. And so whether or not our science faculty want to admit it, they are the first step in teacher preparation. And so for better or for worse, often for worse, they're directly involved. So these are just some NAEP data that I'm sure you're all familiar with. About 30% of students are scoring proficient or above, with only about 3% scoring advanced. And by 12th grade, it just gets worse. There are fewer people scoring proficient, so the bottom line is that the situation gets worse as students move through our system. And so that's a big issue. This shouldn't surprise us, because there's a critical shortage of teachers. This shows physics is my discipline, but you can see here that only 35% of the people that are currently teaching high school physics have a major in physics. And so we shouldn't be too surprised about what can be accomplished given that context in the US. And then when you look at the preparation of physics teachers, please be able to transfer this to your discipline as well. But we found that only about 20% of US universities are producing one physics teacher in the past 2 years. And so you have to ask yourself, who's preparing these teachers? Only a fourth of the teachers that are being prepared at institutions that offer PhDs in physics. So that means that the place that the physics is done, the place that the knowledge is being created, is not the place that's creating the teachers. And you have to ask yourself, who is educating people to be physics teachers, if not the physicists? I mean, this should be a little bit of concern to any disciplinary faculty. Who is doing it? And so, again, they're rarely involved, and this is of great concern. And this is really what the Colorado Learning Assistant Program addresses. I am now skipping slides because you don't need them. We've had plenty of summaries on the kinds of things that do and don't work. So what I'd like to move on to is to talk about our solution at the University of Colorado to the issues that I just talked about, which is the critical shortage of mathematics and science teachers in the US, the lack of involvement of disciplinary faculty in the preparation of those teachers and in the transformation of their own learning environments. And what I'm going to do is talk about the Colorado Learning Assistant model. So what I want to do now is not talk about the fact that students need to be actively engaged. We know that. We know that, that students that students need to be actively engaged, that lecture doesn't work that well for students to learn. And now we need to find out how can we transform these environments given that there are so many economic, social, and political barriers that we face at places like large research universities. So a learning assistant is more than a cheap TA. This is an undergraduate student that is hired to assist in helping us transform our large enrollment courses at the University of Colorado. So these are undergraduate mathematics and science majors that are going to help us transform our program so that it's more student-centered, more interactive in the ways that have already been described today. It's an experiential learning model, as I hope that will be revealed as I go through and try to talk about what it is. It improves the learning assistants, these undergraduate students' content expertise, their interest, and their engagement in teaching and learning. It improves the learning of all students who interact with the program. It helps university faculty, future industry and political leaders realize their agency in educational change. And I think one of the really important parts about it is that it retains some of the classic elements of traditional instruction, as should any change model that's going to bridge the past to the future. There has to be some way of connecting those things that we know how to do and those things that we respect already in our histories. So as I talk about the Colorado Learning Assistant Program, you need to know that there are many, many people involved in it. These are faculty members throughout campus that have utilized learning assistants throughout since 2003. Here we have 2 Nobel Prize winners, numerous National Academies members, and high school teachers, and we've hired, since 2003, 951 learning assistants. The program goals is one of them, and one of the huge goals is teacher recruitment and preparation. We also want to do that through curriculum and course transformation at the university level. Introductory it was, but Steve Pollack later today will talk about our transformations in upper division courses. And then also for us to engage in discipline-based educational research so that we can measure, as I'll show you in just a moment, the effects of these interventions. And this is discipline-based. It may not be the same to measure these kinds of things in biology or in physics or in math. And institutional change more broadly, where we really need to transform our own identities as who we are as scientists and science educators. And these things must interact synergistically in order for any of one of them to take root at a very complex place like a university. So what is course transformation? This is a generalized schematic model of a traditional course. And there you see a whole bunch of little blue students there on the bottom. There's an instructor and a couple graduate TAs. That's traditional with large enrollment courses. Our courses are very, very large. For example, our intro chemistry class has 900 students enrolled. But don't worry, we separate it into 2 sections, and then we can engage in student-centered instruction. It's a little bit more challenging. So what we do is we transform these large enrollment courses so that, for example, in astronomy, we cancel 1 lecture per week, and instead of going to lecture, you go to your learning team. And your learning team has about 6 to 20 students who are now, that little group is headed by that undergraduate learning assistant that I just described. Notice, they're not teaching assistants, they're assisting in the learning. And that's kind of the transformation of philosophy that we also need as we move in this direction. And they interact directly with the instructor. At the same time, these learning assistants make up the pool from which we recruit those new K-12 teachers that we're in this massive shortage of. And so only about 12 to 15% of the learning assistants are actually recruited to become teachers. The failures go on to graduate school. And so this is our traditional lecture, and we're transforming it to environments that you've been hearing about throughout the whole conference. But in these contexts, students can collaborate in answering tutorial, well-sequenced conceptual questions and doing experiments. They have opportunities to articulate and defend their ideas. They can critically analyze and compare their analyses of scientific data. And they're producing, not just consuming, scientific ideas. And they're empowered through that process, as we talked about yesterday. the learning assistant experience, it's not just taking these really talented undergraduates and throw them in and say, teach. It's a matter of engaging in content, in a pedagogy and learning class, and actually in engaging in that in the practice. So in content, they have weekly meetings with their lead faculty member of that large lecture where they plan for the upcoming week, they reflect on the previous week, and they analyze assessment data. In the workshop in the next hour, we'll do more of like, what do those sessions actually look like? And then this feeds directly into their practice as they lead those learning teams each week. And then since they're interacting with such a small group of students, they're able to get a sense of how the students are interacting with the content of the course, and they can feed this information back to the lead instructor of the course who's interacting with a whole lot more students. And then they take a pedagogy course, which is where they learn some practical things that they can do to facilitate group learning tomorrow, and also some of the theoretical models that underlie those kinds of techniques. And they talk about their teaching, they observe each other's teaching, and they do weekly reflections on their own learning and their own teaching. And this, of course, feeds directly back into their practice, but what's really useful is that it feeds into their discourse with the lead faculty member that they're working with. So the scientist or the physicist or biologist or chemist or mathematician that's teaching this class has exposure to some of the educational literature that they may not otherwise have time to access. And it's coming through these undergraduate conduits. So in this case, the learning is embodied within the experience of serving as a learning assistant or serving as a faculty member who's using learning assistants. So it's a very practice-based model of learning where all of those that are participating are learning. And so that's what we mean by experiential learning model. I want to now support my claims about learning by showing you some data. These data are taken by Steve Pollack, who you guys are so lucky to hear a little bit later today. But this are data from one of our transformed introductory electricity and magnetism courses. And it's freshman physics. And you can see that the blue curve there is the distribution of scores on a difficult assessment on E&M before the class, just as the class began. And the red curve right there is the distribution of scores after the class was over. So that's the post-test versus the pre-test. And here you can see a learning gain of 44%. The amount students learned that they didn't already know is 44%, which is almost double traditional averages for traditional lecture style courses, which is 23%. You're going to get a gain of about 23% in those environments. So there's a lot of learning going on in these courses in comparison to national averages for traditional courses. But what's really interesting is that the learning assistants come in scoring high on the high end of the post-test scores, which shouldn't surprise us because those are the ones we recruit, the best students to become learning assistants. But after one semester of serving as an LA, they're at the very tail end of this curve, and their scores look more like graduate physics students' TA scores than they do like their peers. And these are the students that we're recruiting to become high school teachers. We have these data in other disciplines. This is astronomy, and you can see that the TAs make no gain in there, but it's a different content than they're working in. And the LAs, once again, make a very large gain. In chemistry, you could see the pre-test scores in blue and the post-test scores in black. And what we did was a more controlled experiment in chemistry where we did the class 2 times, once without LAs, and then the next time the same class, only this time we used LAs to facilitate some of those recitation sections. And the pre-test scores were the same, so we know we're dealing with a similar population. But the course without LAs, the post-test score was here, and for the class with LAs, it's here. And that was a significant difference in the learning gains of that course with LAs. And the LAs here are again at the high end of the post-test scores, and they learn as a result of teaching. More like the TAs again than like their peers. One quick graph that is these are students who, this is after junior level electricity and magnetism, and these students are scoring, this is after they finished junior level E&M. These students did not, as freshmen, have a learning assistant supported course. These students did have a learning assistant supported course as freshmen, and these are the learning assistants themselves. So those are some of the content gains that we're getting from learning assistant supported courses. What I'd like to turn now to is our impact on teacher recruitment and preparation. It's very simple. This is 5-year averages before and after the Learning Assistant program began at the University of Colorado Boulder. The number of mathematics and science majors that are recruited to K-12, that are completing our teacher certification program. So we've more than doubled that number, and this is in hard to staff areas, such as chemistry and physics. And while these are the number of new students enrolling in teacher certification programs each year. And so while the numbers look very small in comparison to one physics teacher produced every 2 years, you can see that they're getting really, really big. At University of Colorado Boulder, we've recruited 17 physics teachers in the past 5 years. And this is other underrepresented disciplines like molecular biology and math, and especially applied math at our university. Impact on their teaching is what we did is we used the Reformed Teacher Observation Protocol, which is you go in, you observe them teaching, and you see how transformed their teaching is in the high school. So our two populations were learning assistants who then got recruited to become teachers. Now they're out in the field teaching high school math or science. And then we took a matched sample of teachers that came through the same teacher certification program but did not have the learning assistant treatment. And we're already beginning to see significant differences in, at least here for science, 3 areas of the RTOP that's in inquiry, in their content, and in their pedagogical knowledge, things that are emphasized in the Learning Assistant program. The Learning Assistant program is growing at CU. You can see that every year they want more LAs, and I'll talk more about the details of all of these in the next hour. These are the majors that are serving as learning assistants, largely STEM majors. And the program is appearing to be sustainable. This graph shows that big blue block right there is, in the beginning, it was entirely NSF grant funded, and now it's almost entirely funded by our provost, our deans, and our department chairs. Some gifts and still a little bit of grant funds, but those are all but gone, and the provost has taken it as his responsibility to retain this program on the encouragement of 3 college deans. Evidence of faculty change. As I said, the participants of this program are affected, not just the learning assistants, not just the students in transformed courses, but also the faculty. Here's one faculty member who used learning assistants and said, "I've taught this course 1,000,000 times. I could do it in my sleep without preparing a lesson. But now I'm spending a lot more time preparing lessons, thinking, okay, first of all, what's the main concept I'm trying to get across here? What is it I want them to go away knowing?" Which I have to admit, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about in the past, but he's taught it 1,000,000 times. So interacting with learning assistants is helping our faculty to really think about, what am I trying to do here? Because most of our faculty members are really trying to do some wonderful things, just without some of the tools that are necessary to do it. The bottom line, we're impacting about 9,000 students per year at a cost of about $56 per impacted student. And it's really a great bargain. And that's why so many faculty, so many universities throughout the nation are emulating the Colorado Learning Assistant program. We have a 2-day workshop at the University of Colorado every October. And these are the ones we know about. But every time I turn around, like yesterday, you get an email that says, "Yeah, I've been doing this program for 3 years, and I don't get that one lesson." And so there are different universities popping up all the time. But it addresses multiple stakeholders. Enrolled students learn the subject matter better. Learning assistants learn the subject matter better and become better teachers and better learners. University faculty become better teachers. And faculty and learning assistants recognize their agency in educational change. And so it really is a larger scale institutional transformation model that you can take any little piece of and implement it, and hopefully it'll lead to some bit of change. Is it the only transformation model out there? Absolutely not, but it's one that's easy for multiple stakeholders to take advantage of and use tomorrow. And we have a lot of information on the website where you can download the manual and other things we'll talk about in the next hour. And I'm really thankful to many generous organizations that have promoted and funded the program. Thank you.
Questions? Bob Zwick.
Hello.
The RTOP data that you got, were the observers blind, or did they know that they were looking at elderly people or not?
They were blind. Yes. Yes.
When you get into these groups with the learning assistants, do the learning assistants have a specific plan for what they're going to be discussing? How do they go through that? How do they use that time?
Wonderful question. When the learning assistants get with their learning teams, do they have a plan for what they're supposed to be doing? That's your question. Now, every department does it differently. But in physics, we use the University of Washington tutorials, which we're going to go through a sample of in the next hour. But so the LAs in the physics department have a very well planned out thing they're going to do. In the chemistry department, we're building our own tutorials. In math, we're also building our own kind of sequenced, activity-based lessons that the students work through with the help or the guidance of the learning assistant. So in almost every case, they've spent some time talking with and planning for what they're going to do with those students. In applied math, we do oral assessments, and so the LAs kind of lead students in orally defending their ideas. So it's different in every department, but there is a plan, and there's different levels of planning in every place, and some of them aren't as good as others, and that's all there is to it as we learn. Other questions? Yes?
What kind of faculty support do you provide to get them to transition to this model?
What kind of faculty support do we provide to help faculty transition to this model? Again, it depends on where you are, what department you're in. And so in physics, they have a co-teaching model where 2 faculty members are assigned to a particular course. So one that hasn't done this has opportunities to shadow some of those that have. In some other departments, we have very little support, but there's always a live one. I call them live ones. The one that's, we call them, ready to play ball in this arena is there to support their other faculty members. We run a workshop once a year now, or we would love to do it every semester to help faculty get started with the Learning Assistant program. But if there's one of the biggest challenges that we personally have at the University of Colorado, it's getting better with that faculty support and development. What we've been excellent with is faculty support at every other university. So thank you for that question, and we'll continue to provide materials that are available online for exactly that kind of support. We have a booklet that describes the different models in different departments that can facilitate assistance. Yes,
So,
stop.
in the spirit of what we have learned this morning about not having giant auditoriums with lots of people in them, we're going to move to our active learning environments with our breakout sessions. Please stay seated for a minute while I provide instructions, but let's also thank Valerie again before
Thank
we
you.
do that.
This program is protected by a copyright and may not be redistributed in whole or in part without the express written consent of Rice Digital Media Services.